All right, so we had some technical glitches to start us off, but here I am. So I'm Mick Schroeter. I'm the Director of Winemaking for Sonoma-Cutrer, coming to you live from our home in Geyserville. We were going to do this out on the deck. Beautiful day up here in northern Sonoma County, but it's also quite gusty and windy. So so we had to go to plan B, and we're in my wife Linda's studio. And so at this point, I'd like to introduce my my co-host for this afternoon, and who'll be taking the questions as you type them in for a later discussion after we've gone through the tasting. So Linda, come and say hi to everybody.
Hi, everybody.
So yeah, so she'll be looking at all those questions and telling me what to do. Actually, that's the same it normally is. So today's no different than any other day. So thanks, honey. Linda's also a fantastic artist. She's yeah, see, she's embarrassed as well, but she's working on a great piece behind me. Each year I've been doing a series of wine dinners up at a lodge up in Sitka, up in Alaska, a lodge called Talon Lodge. And every evening, like dozens of bald eagles come onto the island and feed on some of the fish that we bring in. So Linda's working on this wonderful piece of a bald eagle from our travels up in Alaska. So the plan of attack for today is we're going to talk a little bit within. Hopefully you've gone out and you bought the wines. If not, we'll be able to talk through the wines, and when you get the opportunity to buy them, hopefully reflect on all the words of wisdom that Mick had for you. So we're going to be tasting our Sonoma Coast Chardonnay first, and then we're going to launch into the Russian River Valley Pinot. So I'm in a little bit of a unique situation up here, that we live outside of the town of Geyserville, which is up in Alexander Valley in northern Sonoma County. One of the unique attributes of our area is the influence of the fog, and it seems a little strange, but we actually get more fog in the summer than we do during the winter months. And so on a July, August, September day, I'll get up in the morning and I'll just see some wispy fog up out of our window. We live up in the hills on the eastern side of Alexander Valley. But as I drive down to Sonoma-Cutrer, which is about a 20-minute drive, and it only takes about 10 minutes to get to the northern boundary of the Russian River Valley. But all of a sudden, I'm driving in clear, beautiful sunshine, and then all of a sudden, where did the sun go? And I start driving into the fog. So we have these unique climatic conditions here. The Pacific Ocean is actually really quite cold up here in Northern California. All of our currents sweep down from Alaska. So it's only when you get down to Southern California that the ocean water is somewhat more temperate to be able to swim in. So think about, we've got the cold ocean currents here in Northern California, yet the jet stream is coming in from more tropical zones and tends to be more moisture laden and a lot warmer. So when it hits these cold waters, it condenses that moisture that's in the atmosphere and causes this incredible bank of sea fog that sits out over the ocean. So if you've ever been to San Francisco in the summer or the fall, and you go flying into SFO, you'll just see this massive bank of fog, and then a lot of times you're landing down through the fog. So as the landmass heats up on a summer's day, hot air rises and it sucks that fog in from the coast. We have a lot of quite rugged coastal hills right next to the ocean up in our area here, but there's some low-lying hills called the Petaluma Gap or the Bloomfield Gap, and that's really the avenue that allows this fog to creep into Russian River Valley. So if you think late afternoon, as that hot air is rising, the wind and the fog starts to get pulled in from the Pacific Ocean, works its way across the Russian River Valley. Russian River Valley is quite a broad, open valley. So where the fog is coming in, it really is quite windy. But then as it gets out into Russian River Valley proper, kind of the winds die down and the fog works its way from the western side of the valley to the eastern side. And when it bumps up against the Cara mountain ranges, then it starts to work its way north up to where we live here in Geyserville. So wherever the fog gets to last, that's where it's thinnest. So progressively, next day when the sun comes out, it burns off the fog up in our area first, and then progressively from the eastern side of Russian River Valley out towards the coast. What does that do for us in terms of grape growing? It really gives us these absolutely world-class growing conditions in the Russian River Valley to produce truly spectacular Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. So interestingly, where I live here in central Alexander Valley, even though we're only about 10 miles away from the fringe of Russian River Valley, it's significantly warmer here than it is just 10 miles down the road. So up here in Alexander Valley, there is probably hardly anybody that plants Pinot Noir because it is too warm a climate for Pinot. So we're really Cabernet Sauvignon and to a lesser extent Chardonnay up in this region. And it's only when you get down to the Russian River Valley that you really get these incredible climatic conditions that really suit the style of what is Sonoma-Cutrer. And that style is a lot of people, when they think of California Chardonnay, they think of big, rich, oaky, buttery, very full-bodied styles of Chardonnay. But Sonoma-Cutrer is a much more elegantly structured style of Chardonnay with very bright fruit characters. I am getting a little thirsty, so let's have a taste of this. So if you're at home or here in California, you could be still in the office. If you're able to, pour a glass of the Chardonnay. And while I think of it, if you go to the Sonoma-Cutrer website, you can actually buy the 6-pack of wines that are being tasted today. Next week, we're going to have Zidanelia, our Pinot Noir winemaker, tasting 2 spectacular Pinots, our incredible rosé, and then this year's brand new release of our Russian River Valley Pinot, but it's been finished in Woodford Reserve, freshly emptied bourbon barrels. So really quite an intriguing wine, and I'll let Z talk about that next week. And then the following week, we're going to have Cara talk about 2 of our single vineyard Chardonnays. So getting back to it, if you go to sonoma-cutrer.com, you can actually buy the 6-pack at a great price and have it delivered to your door. And then if you enjoy any of those wines, we've got a great deal on until April 24 that any orders over $99, we're paying for the shipping and it gets shipped right to your door. So that's my little plug for the tasting room who have been closed now for the last 3 weeks with the stay-at-home and shelter-in-place orders here in California. I digress. So let's get back to tasting some Chardonnay. So as I mentioned, this is the Sonoma Coast. In this instance, I'm drinking the 2018. You'll be able to find this in many stores across the country, or you may also see the 2017. We're kind of transitioning, but even though there'll be some vintage variation from year to year, the style is inherently similar each time. So the aromas here, lots of peach and nectarine, those wonderful stone fruits, some really nice ripe apple fruit aromas. My wife is in the background here, and I think she's indicating she's probably a little thirsty as well. So lots of those lovely stone fruits. Even though this has been barrel fermented, about 85% of it is barrel ferment, 15% is in a tank ferment. I don't get a lot of oak character in here because we only use a relatively small amount of new barrels we're using barrels up to 7 years old, which means we've used them 7 consecutive vintages. So usually by the time we get to usually about year 4, we don't get a lot of oak character, and we actually like that. So we want to have some of that fresh oak character that we get from the new and the 1 and 2 year old used barrels. But by the time we get to those later years, we're not getting a lot of oak character, but we're getting the effect of the maturation effect of aging and fermenting the wine in barrels. So it adds to the complexity, it adds to the creaminess on the mid palate, and then that tank ferment really gives us that wonderful bright fresh fruit character that you see on the nose here. So a lot of those typical California Chardonnays tend to be very full-bodied, very rich and mouth-coating. If you notice the way this sits on the palate, it's much more linear on the palate, that it starts at the front and really works its way back, that it doesn't have this overarching fullness, but it has this beautiful focus on the palate. And as I mentioned earlier, just a really nice light mid-palate creaminess. And then the characteristic thing about all of Sonoma-Cutrer Chardonnays, they finish with this wonderful, beautiful, bright, crisp acidity. Not overly acidic, and that's because the wines have gone through this process of malolactic fermentation that really helps soften the profile of the acidity, but helps to maintain the brightness of the acidity that you get on the palate. So I hope you enjoyed the, oh my God. Our motto is drinking in moderation, honey. I know it's 5 o'clock somewhere, but I did actually need to empty my glass for the Pinot. A few questions on the Chardonnay. If you can't, I've just sprung that on her. So, in the meantime, I'm going to pour some Pinot Noir.
Wife is the boss from Christian. I like that.
Really? I thought I was the boss. No, I put up a little struggle, and I think I'm the boss. So, yeah. So, and I'm sure one of the questions is going to be, where is that accent from? And so I get that question a lot. So it's not from the UK. It's not from South Africa. I had someone ask if I was from Alabama a few months ago. Really? And for God's sake, it is not from New Zealand. So that leaves, hopefully, just the only other option is Australia.
We have a question.
Linda's an Aussie as well. So I'll translate what she has to say.
Todd Kennedy, Mick, have the vines budded yet?
So that's a really great question. So here we are in early April, and yes, Chardonnay vines have budded out already. One of the reasons that I absolutely love what I do is every year is different because we're reliant on the weather. We had a remarkable statistic in February. We did not receive a measurable amount of rainfall for the entire month of February, where it should be normally one of our wettest months. So that actually got the vines thinking, hey, spring's on the way. So the vines actually budded out a good 2 to 3 weeks earlier than they would normally be coming out. So that's created not so much for us, but for all of our vineyard guys. This is a real headache time of the year, because these little buds and these little shoots and clusters are so susceptible to frost. So typically for us in this region, by the time we get to early May, the atmosphere is warmed up enough, and that's the end of frost season. So with the vines coming out earlier this year, and a lot of fairly dry weather, cloudless nights, we've had a lot of issues with frost this year. We're a sustainably certified vineyard and winery operation. And one of the things that we introduced as part of our sustainability is we've replaced over half of our vineyard that gets protected from the frost by sprinklers with fans going on at night. But the vineyard guys have been getting up at 9, 10 o'clock at night, having to start watching when the temperature gets down to about 34 to turn those fans on to circulate the warm air that's higher up with the cold air below and reduce the potential for frost.
We have another question.
Yeah.
From Ryan Doran, do you blend wine from different age barrels and rotate in and out of new barrels and 7-year barrels? Out of new barrels and 7-year barrels.
Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, good question there too. No, each vintage we use a barrel once. So the way we make the wines, even though we only make 5 Chardonnays, of which Sonoma Coast and Russian River Ranches, which you can only primarily find in restaurants, we make in excess of 200 unique batches of Chardonnay. Each of those batches then goes into a grouping of barrels. So no one batch goes into only brand new barrels. So each batch will go into a series of new and used barrels that if that batch, and this is particular to the Cutrer or Lake Pierre, each of those batches need to be in their unique mix of barrels for that particular blend. So that way, when we're assessing all of the wines, we're not looking at a wine that is overly oaky and then another batch that doesn't see any new barrels at all, or maybe a tank. So each batch is going into a barrel once, and then that barrel we will reuse for 7 years. So this year we will be selling off barrels that we purchased back in 2013.
So another question from Sharon Minty. Can you share what the difference between Sonoma Coast and Russian River is? And is one better to serve with food?
Getting some cool questions here. This makes it a lot easier. From a winemaking perspective, we hold Sonoma Coast and Russian River Ranches on the same plane in terms of quality. They're just a slightly different style. So the interesting thing, going back to when I was talking about the climatic conditions and the way the fog invades our area, depending on where that fog gets to and where it burns away, creates differences in the fruit, where that fruit comes from. The French use that word terroir. So terroir has nothing to do with winemaking. It's all about the fruit. Where the fruit's grown, what the soil is like, what the climatic conditions are like in that vineyard, and the way those vines are managed. So even though Sonoma Coast and Russian River Ranches come from geographically that similar area, where most of it is actually in Russian River Valley, it depends on where in Russian River Valley the fruit comes from. So, so typically, fruit that's grown in the northern end and the eastern side of Russian River Valley, being slightly warmer, tend to be wines that have more of the stone fruits. So they end up in Sonoma Coast. As we get to more central and western side of Russian River, where it's cooler, those grapes and those wines tend to end up going into Russian River Ranches. So Russian River Ranches, if we had that side by side, Russian River Ranches would have more citrus characters like lemon and lime, more green apple rather than red apple or ripe apple that we see in Sonoma Coast. Because Russian River Ranches comes from those cooler areas, it has higher natural acidity. So there's a little more acidity in Russian River Ranches than there is here in the Sonoma Coast. So in answer to the second part of the question, I think Russian River Ranches is a very versatile wine and really goes remarkably well with food. And that's why we sell the vast majority of Russian River Ranches in restaurants rather than in retail, because in retail, people are taking it home. You can be enjoying it on an afternoon like this, but because it's got this bright acidity, it too is a wonderful food wine. Steady up there, fella.
Okay.
One more.
How long can we store Sonoma Coast in appropriate cellar conditions? And that's from John Hayes.
Hello, John. And all sorts of great questions, hey. So I think one of the questions that every winemaker gets is, how long can I store this wine? How long is it going to be good for? How, is it just going to get better and better and better the longer I keep it? The answer really is, it's really up to personal preference. So for me, I like the wines, all of these wines are ready to drink when we release them. Some wines we actually hold back a little bit later, like Les Pierres, for instance, one of our vineyard wines. We actually deliberately keep that at the winery longer so that we're doing the aging rather than you are at home. But having said that, while the wines drink beautifully now, they do age remarkably well. And it's the brightness of the acidity that really helps white wines age well. So a typical, more full-bodied style of California Chardonnay, most of the time those wines really don't age particularly well, where something like this Sonoma Coast is going to drink beautifully over the course of the next few years. And it also depends on your storage conditions. But I'd be wary of keeping any wines too long with the thought that I'm going to buy this case and I'm going to put it away for 10 years and then I'm going to drink it for our anniversary. You might find in 10 years' time you don't like the way that wine is aged, because wine is a living, aging thing. It's not stagnant. It's continually changing. And I kind of like to reference it to like human beings. We're kind of this typical bell-shaped curve. You're young, you get better and better, you plateau for a long time, and then eventually get a little older and you go downhill. Wine is much the same way. In its youth, it gets better and better, plateaus, and you really want to be in that window when it plateaus, because as wines get older, they lose a lot of their bright, fresh fruit characters.
Another question from Ashley Cheetham. Aside from enjoying the Pinot by itself, what is your favourite dish to pair with it?
What a good segue into Pinot Noir. Okay, honey. So let me talk about the Pinot first. We have the coolest little Pinot winery on the Cutrer estate. So the main winery is where all the Chardonnay is made, and 95% of what we do is Chardonnay. That's our thing. And we've never tried to be something to everybody. We've remained focused on the two great Burgundian varieties. So we've got this wonderful little Pinot Noir winery. I don't want to talk too much about it because I don't want to steal Z's thunder, because you've got to tune in this time, 3 o'clock next week, for the second of our virtual tastings. But I really love this Pinot Noir. I think as I've gotten older, and my wife is still so youthful and young.
Right question. Right answer.
But I don't drink anywhere near as many big, rich, heavy, full-bodied red wines. Before coming here, I used to be a red winemaker for a company called Penfolds in Australia, and made some of the greatest Shiraz-based wines in the world. A wine like Penfolds Grange, which is way out of my price league now, but it is a big, rich, full-bodied wine, and we hardly even drink white wine when we're in Australia. But I love the elegance of Pinot Noirs, and now unless we get friends coming around, we'll break out, something bigger and bolder out of the cellar. But most of the time, we just love the elegance of Pinot Noir. And this Pinot strikes a beautiful balance between Pinots that can be very light and elegant to ones that are very rich and full-bodied. So I think this strikes a really nice balance in the middle that it's got the essence of what Pinot Noir is with its elegance, but at the same time, it's really got this wonderful juicy core. So on the nose here, I get lots and lots of cherry fruit characters, those red cherry, dark cherry. If you look a little deeper into the wine, you start to see a little more earth and baking spice, elements of like being in a damp forest, that forest floor character. Very, very complex wine. On the palate, it's got the elegance, but at the same time, it's got this wonderful juicy core of those red fruits on the palate, and then finishes with some really lovely acidity. So what do I pair this with? My absolute favorite, duck. I think one of the classic pairings with Pinot Noir. One of the things that I just don't cook at home. It's one of those things that when you go out to the restaurant and there's duck breast or confit on the list, this and duck is great. And actually, while I talk about kind of restaurants too, get out there and support your local restaurants. I think as we've heard across the country, just all of the people that work in restaurants, sadly, along with many, many other industries and people, but I think in particular for us in the wine business, and especially with Sonoma-Cutrer, with our wines with the affinity of restaurant foods, that just going out and we're trying to do at least once a week, going out and supporting one of our local restaurants. Actually, Catelli's, if you guys are watching, we're coming down later on. We're going to pick up some lasagna from our local restaurant. I might have to bring out something a little bit heavier tonight, honey, to go with the lasagna.
Ooh, promises. So, Jennifer Estes, if wines plateau, then why do people hold onto vintage wines for so long?
Because everybody likes something differently. So that's one of the keys, that if you're aging wine, you really want to continually evaluate it. And when you get to that point, some people like it when it's just at the start, when it's youthful and bright and vibrant and really elegant. Other people want to see a little bit more complexity. And then even once you go over the other side, you've lost a lot of those fruit characters, but you've found a lot of really interesting complexity, less of the fruit character, but more of the bottle age character. So to be careful not to wait too long. So typically, if I've got wines in the cellar, and I maybe break out something on a year or two and holding on to it, but as soon as I get to a point, oh my God, this is fantastic. If it's already fantastic, it's probably not going to get that much better. So it's really up to personal taste, that when you think, oh, this is at its absolute greatest window. One of my biggest disappointments is I've held on to wines. I thought, I just can't bring myself to drink the last bottle, and I'll hold on to it, and it's not as good as I thought. So it's a very personal thing.
What makes Russian River Valley special for Pinot Noir versus Anderson Valley or Central Coast? From Warren Bidme.
Good one, Warren. And this is the great thing about the wine business, that when you go into the wine store, it's an absolute sea of brands out there. I don't know of another industry that has so much competition than the wine business. Thousands and thousands of brands. There's over 8,000 wineries just in the US alone. And then you think about in Europe. So it's just an incredible maze of wines out there. Yet everybody's able to find their kind of niche. And so part of that is terroir. what I spoke about kind of earlier. So whether it's down on the Central Coast in Santa Barbara or Santa Maria, those wines are different from each other versus Oregon. And I wouldn't just lump Oregon because you've got all of the individual areas, the different, what they call AVAs, the unique viticultural growing areas. So, so I really don't think those wines are any better or they're just different. And so again, it's finding out the style that suits your palate and enjoying those wines. Hopefully, Sonoma-Cutrer is one of them.
And Mark Bain, what is the current vintage for the Pinot?
So the Pinot at the moment is our 2017. We've been stringing along some absolutely fantastic years. We're very, very fortunate here in the Russian River Valley. Compared to a lot of other grape growing regions, it's very difficult to grow Pinot and Chardonnay in Burgundy and France, for instance. They've had some very, very challenging weather conditions. So one of the advantages we have here in Russian River Valley is, even though this year we're experiencing another dry year, because we're so close to the ocean, we have this great moderating effect that it's, when we talk about we've had a bad year, that's still a good year in a lot of areas. So we're very, very fortunate with the vintages that we've had here in Russian River Valley.
There is a question going back to Chardonnay from Todd Kennedy. Which type of Sonoma-Cutrer Chardonnay goes best with grilled lemon pepper chicken, and why?
So Todd, I'm assuming you're cooking this up tonight. So you're what was it? Lemon chicken
Pepper, yeah.
Yeah. So the thing to think about with any dish and food and wine pairing is balance the weight of the wine with the weight of the food. If you've got a food that's got a lot of acidity, you need a wine that has acidity to match. So so Todd, if you've got if you're a member of Sonoma-Cutrer and you happen to have the Russian River Ranches Chardonnay, as I said earlier, in most states, you can't buy Russian River Ranches in retail. You can only buy it in restaurants. So one of the great advantages of being a member of the Sonoma-Cutrer, the Sonoma-Cutrer Wine Club, or ordering the wine with the special deal, that free shipping on orders over $99, is you can get Russian River Ranches shipped to your door. You don't just have to go out to the restaurant. So my recommendation is, if you had some Russian River Ranches with that lemon chicken, thinking about the acidity on the chicken, it would go really well with Russian River Ranches or Les Pierres. But even so, I think chicken and providing, and I highly doubt that the acid is going to be through the roof, the acidity in the Sonoma Coast Chardonnay is actually going to work very well. I would even have a glass of Pinot Noir with your chicken as well.
We have another question from Hope.
She's trying to
Helton.
She's trying to keep me rolling here.
His answers are very long, trying to get through all of these questions. Hope Helton, how did Mick get started in winemaking?
So I come from a winemaking family. I was born and raised in an area called the Barossa Valley in South Australia, and my father thinks that my daughter, oldest daughter Matilda, she is completing her associate degree in winemaking, and she's 26, she'll be 26 this year. She only just figured out in the last few years she wanted to be a winemaker, and I keep telling her, couldn't have you thought about that when I was paying for you to go to college? So another long-winded answer, but kind of when I was 12 or 13, I knew I wanted to be a winemaker. I didn't want to work for Penfolds, but ended up starting my career in the lab at the winery next door. And the very first acquisition that Penfolds ever made to become what is now Treasury Wine Estates was the winery next door. So I ended up working for Penfolds, and they actually studied they paid for my studies at Roseworthy Agricultural College to get my winemaking degree. Kind of like a scholarship thing, except I was working for a winery rather than the scholarship coming from the college. But never in my wildest dreams did I think I'd be making wine in here in California. So Linda and I were traveling around the world back in the early 90s, and a friend of mine who was making wine here in Alexander Valley made me an offer to come back and look after the winemaking here. And we thought long and hard about it, and we didn't have kids at the time, so we thought, what the heck, what have we got to lose? So we made a 5-year plan that we'd uproot our lives and come over to the US. That's almost 27 years now. How's it going over here, honey?
It's going pretty good. Keeps me filled. And to answer someone else's question, we were a blind date when we were super young. They wanted to know how we met. Back to wine, there is another question here. How do you know when you have a particularly good vintage? From Dina Pelland.
Really tough to figure out what is a really great vintage, especially with Pinot Noir, because the wines continue to evolve and change all of the time. So sometimes early on, and like 2000 and last year, vintage 19, the wines in vintage 19, especially, both Chardonnay and Pinot, both were so expressive very, very early on, and they really showed their true colours. Other vintages are sleepers. And if I go back to 2011, which was a challenging year because we had a lot of rain right in the middle of harvest, I was never that thrilled with the wines. Even when we got to bottling, they're okay, but they're not, they're just not blowing me away. 6 months later, what the heck happened to this wine? It looks fantastic. So that's one of these great things about the wine business, that the wines are constantly evolving and changing. So I think we've been at this for about 3/4 of an hour. So let's do kind of 1 or 2 more questions, and then I think we'll wrap it up.
Okay, so what is the wine that you're most proud of? I didn't ask you this one already, did I?
No.
What is the wine that you are most proud of making, and what is the one that challenges you the most? From Terry Stamp.
I think the most challenging is Pinot. Chardonnay is a very adaptable, very agreeable kind of wine to make. But Pinot Noir has always been the holy grail of varieties for winemakers to make. I think we're very fortunate that we have 2 incredible estate vineyards, our Vine Hill Ranch, which is right in the heart of Russian River Valley, and then our Owsley Ranch, which is deep down in the southwestern corner of the Russian River Valley. So those vineyards kind of make it easier. What was the first part of that one?
I'm on to another question here. What is the wine that you're most proud of making, and what is the one that challenges you the most?
Yeah. I think the one that we're most proud of is probably Russian River Ranches, which is the Chardonnay that you get in restaurants, because it's our largest production. Over half of our production is Russian River Ranches, and it's relatively easy to make a good wine with small parcels from year to year. But to make a reasonable size volume and be able to do it consistently well year in, year out is really the challenge for the winemaker. So we're considered a medium-sized winery by California standards. So we're not small, but we're definitely not a large winery. But because we're only making just a few wines, and in particular Sonoma Coast and Russian River Ranches are our larger volumes, they're the wines that are much more challenging to make because of the consistency that we strive for. And I think if you've looked at the Wine and Spirit magazine for something like 27 or 28 years, they've been conducting their restaurant poll of fine dining, that Sonoma-Cutrer has been either number one or number two, or definitely in the top three for every single year since that poll has been undertaken. We've been making Russian River Ranches since 1981. So being only the third director of winemaking in the history of the brand, I'm very proud of what our team, both in the vineyard and the winery, is able to do to maintain the quality and the consistency and the style of what is Russian River Ranches.
Another question.
All right, last one.
Okay, Kimberly Casanova asks, they say you can't choose a favourite child, but do you have a favourite vineyard block within that vineyard?
I haven't. That's a new twist on what's your favourite child. I gotta say the vineyard that I'm most partial to is Les Pierres. Cara is going to talk about Les Pierres and the Cutrer single vineyard wines in 2 weeks' time. So you got Z at 3 o'clock California time next Wednesday, Cara the following Wednesday at 3 o'clock. So tune in for both of those. But one of the most fascinating wines I've ever tried was when we first came here. Myself and my friend Daryl, we did a huge tasting of about 25 high-end Chardonnays in California, and there were two that really stuck in my mind as being unbelievably unique and great wines, and one of those was this winery called Sonoma-Cutrer. I've been here now for 10 years, so this is going back about 25 years ago when we did the tasting. So little did I know that I'd be working with Les Pierres 15 years later. And the first time I go walking into Les Pierres each early harvest, usually about the second or third week of August is when we start going out into the vineyards, and Les Pierres is always the first vineyard that we pick. Is walking out into Les Pierres, there's this aura, because Les Pierres is one of these iconic Chardonnay, California Chardonnay vineyards. So there's something enthralling about being out in Les Pierres. Probably the F blocks are my favorite blocks at Les Pierres, and typically they're components of Les Pierres. So let's wrap it up. I'm sure
there is one quick more.
All right, one last one, honey.
From Kenzie Floyd, difference between screw top and cork. Sonoma Coast Chardonnay has a cork, while Russian River Ranches is a screw top. Why are these different?
All right. So actually another cool question. So we transitioned to the screw cap on Russian River Ranches back in 2007. So Russian River Ranch has been under screw cap for in excess of 10 years now. And I think and it's Cara and Terry Adams, the former director of winemaking, that kind of take the credit for the vision of changing to screw cap. Inherently, corks can be inconsistent. Cork comes from the bark of the tree, and a small percentage of those corks can cover up and mask the characters of the wine. And its worst case is a compound called TCA that'll make the wine go musty. So despite all of the testing that we do, we just can't eliminate 100% of the corks that are likely to fail. So we've actually transitioned Sonoma Coast to what's called an agglomerated cork, which are little cork granules that have been recombined, but each of those little granules has gone through a very specific process at the manufacturer and eliminated the TCA from those corks. But with vintage, sometime with the vintage 19, we're actually going to transition Sonoma Coast to a screw cap. It's going to be a little bit different looking style of screw cap. It'll look a little more like a capsule. It's a cap called a Lux cap. It's in what's called an internally threaded screw cap. So you won't see the thread on the outside because there's a component inside that gets screwed down. The reason that I like screw caps, and I would have changed, you know, kind of in a heartbeat, but it's taken us some time because Sonoma Coast is retail, and kind of in our competitive set, there's really very, very few other wineries that are under screw cap. So we are taking a dive in there. But what I love about screw cap is the consistency, that the wine is exactly the way we put it into the bottle. It's not going to change from bottle to bottle. So there's no variation. And one of the other benefits of a screw cap is it keeps the wines more youthful and fresher, that they age slower. So if you start thinking about, and I think it was John had the question earlier on, how long can I age this Sonoma Coast Chardonnay? Once it goes under the screw cap, you can actually age it a little bit longer because there's less oxygen transfer through the liner and the cap. So white wines in particular stay brighter and fresher. So that's why you see a lot of Sauvignon Blancs and Rieslings, practically all of them under a screw cap now, because those wines really don't, for the most part, don't age as well, and they're much better when they're bright and fresh.
Mm-hmm.
So
I may have missed a couple of questions. I'm sorry. They were coming in pretty fast there for a little bit, but hopefully most of the questions were answered, and there's more coming up, so you'll be able to answer. Cara and Zia will probably be able to answer more for you.
So I hope you've enjoyed the first of the Sonoma-Cutrer virtual tastings. So many of us are a sheltering place. We're all concerned about the effect of the virus and what is happening to people's lives and the economy. And so it's our sincere wish and hope that you're all doing well out there. Keep up the social distancing. We just got, a friend made us some masks today, so we'll start kind of wearing those when we're going out into the supermarket, and hopefully we get through this in the near future, and we will get through it. So cheers, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the afternoon.
Cheers.
Bye.